I thought I had seen somewhere that we were gonna go quarterly or every other month or something.
That's something that we suggested, but I don't think we're there yet. That we just,
She had the opposite problem.
There's a lot
Her
going
head
on.
was a little small.
that,
because of the helmet.
the more that I.
Good afternoon and welcome to the City Council Finance Committee meeting of Thursday, September 19th, 2024. There are 4 items on the agenda. First of these, the introduction of Forbes LLC, auditors for the City of Norman. First, we're doing it first on the
I'll
map.
first introduce Clint Mercer, who is our chief accountant.
Thank you, sir.
He'll introduce Joel and Kirsty, and
This is Joe Hosser and Kirsty Morrison.
Yes.
All
You want
right.
to pass these out? Yeah, we do that fast. Thank you. Extra ones, but I'll get it started. Thanks for the introduction, and we are getting ready to begin the audit for June 30th of 2024. So what I've passed around and you guys, the name, in case you haven't noticed, the name has changed this year from Forvis to Forvis Mazars. So we set up a global network with Mazar Ltd, which is based out of France. It's still 2 separate firms, but we've combined names, and so now we're Forvis Mazars with international offices. So if you guys ever want to open a branch in a different country, apparently we can help provide services for that. But the name has changed, same people, little impact to the offices, but just wanted to make you guys aware of that. The biggest change is that we've gone from red to blue as far as colors. So that's probably what you'll notice. But I've got the pre-audit report, which we typically issue every year for everybody to know. Basically gives you some outline of what to expect from the audit. I'll go through it quickly, but won't spend a ton of time. So we audit 2 things. We audit the city's ACFR, which is the financial statements. And we also perform a single audit, which is an audit on your federal awards. So we issue different opinions on those 2 areas, but that's pretty much what that talks about on the first page. On page 2, kind of talks about and outlines the responsibilities. So our responsibility are to audit the financial statements. The city is responsible for putting together the financial statements, is the common delineator, but of course we're still around to answer questions, and I mean we can still assist. You're not a public company from a stock trading standpoint, so we can still assist in accounting guidance. You don't have to have that completely separate. Next to talk about, so the city produces an ACFR, which is an annual comprehensive financial report, which is the gold standard for cities and governments. But with that, we don't necessarily audit everything in the ACFR, so there's a couple sections that we don't actually issue an opinion on. That's what's outlined here. The statistical section in the back is not audited. The kind of first part of it that the city manager, I think, makes a transmittal letter, we don't necessarily audit that. So those are really the only 2 sections that are not. The planned timing, so we plan to get started. We've actually already gotten started. But we plan to be on site starting October 14th, and that will run pretty much up till Thanksgiving. And then we always issue the financial statements before that first December city council meeting. So everything can wrap up. It's due to the state by the end of December. So typically we don't run into any problems or challenges of getting that issued. So planned audit scope, just so everybody's aware, I won't go through all of these in details, but it just establishes some of our understandings and some of the critical risks that we identify that we really take a active approach in auditing. And you can see those on page 3, which in case anybody's ever curious, so the 3 biggest areas that we have to address when we perform the audit is assess the risk of management's override of controls. So that's where you have an established internal control structure, all your policies and procedures that are put together. We don't issue opinions on those policies and procedures, but we do use them in the audit. And if there are overrides or something has happened that's not supposed to happen, we focus very heavily on that. Improper revenue recognition is another significant risk that we have to identify and audit. And the last part, accrued liabilities, especially in city governments, are always a big risk because there's a lot of estimates involved. So that's, if you've got lawsuits, what are those? Your compensated absences that you have to pay out, accounts payable. And the biggest ones, everybody's favorite, are the pensions and other post-employment benefits. So we those are significant risks. We do a lot of procedures around testing those. Last thing really to talk about is just consideration of error and fraud. So one of the common questions that we get is how do you address fraud in financial statements? So fraud in financial statements, and that's our biggest focus. So we're required to design our audits to detect any material misstatements. So material is a little bit, say, subjective. Different firms have different methodologies, but basically what materiality is if I were a user of these financial statements, so an investor, banker, somebody of that nature, if there was an error, would I notice it and would it affect my decision making? So that's how we set our thresholds of what we audit. We have to design it so that we would find anything that would cause that to be an issue, but not necessarily audit every transaction. So that's what this kind of talks about. And what we go through is we'll interview certain people. We know you have a new internal auditor this year, so we've already touched base. We'll talk to her, see what she's planning on doing, and are available for other discussions, but she's part of that process. We also interview just different individuals within the city and just see what kind of fraud risks may be out there. And so we'll assess all that, get our planning together, and then we'll start applying our procedures. And so with that, there's an attachment to the back of this. The great news about this audit this year is we don't have any significant new standards to adopt. So I know Clint and Anthony are probably very excited. We've had leases, we've had a lot of stuff the past couple of years. They finally gave us a 1-year reprieve of not having to do a lot of implementation. So all those are in the back. If anybody ever gets bored or can't sleep at night, you can read a bunch of auditing standards. And then on the very back, Appendix B, I guess to back up, so the Governmental Accounting Standards Board is who sets the standards for what everybody follows for city governments. Those have to be implemented by the city, and then we, of course, audit them. On the very back are our Statement of Auditing Standards. So when you get to Appendix B, the SAS numbers, SAS just stands for Statement of Auditing Standards. Those are the standards issued by the AICPA, which we're required to follow as part of our audit procedures. So there are some that need to be adopted, but nothing that I would say are significant that would impact what the city and really to explain what we're doing. A lot of it, go figure, is around IT type stuff because everything is becoming computerized. And so a lot of those standards have to get changed just every year because the pace of technology. So those are all back there, but at this point, I'll be happy to answer any questions or if anybody
How long have
has.
you been auditing for the city?
So we have been auditing for the city. I think our current contract are 3 years with 2-year renewal. I think this is the 3rd year of that cycle, and I think this is the 2nd cycle total. So I'd say probably year 8 is where we are. In
You got a
the
long
cycle.
history that you already know,
Yes.
now you're looking at it.
That helps a whole lot, honestly. And I know rotation has just been talked about a lot in the accounting world just because there is a lot of fraud and that goes into things, and especially in the early 2000s, there was issues with rotation. Honestly, doing this and a lot of studies that have been done afterwards, it's the longer the auditor is with the city or any entity, you know the dirty laundry that's going on and can actually be more effective in finding fraud through that process. So, it helps to have some of the background and know those individuals and kind of where to look for things. So,
I was gonna say, maybe it was this time last year. Was it basically like the water fund had like raised an issue, which we just
yes.
passed a water rate increase, so that shouldn't be a problem this time, but
And that was basically, they were saying, well, you guys really need to be looking at your rates.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So we followed through.
That's great.
I was gonna say, is besides IT, I think one of the things I heard about was like AI technology being
Yes.
used for fraud. I just came off a Oklahoma Municipal League conference.
Oh, okay,
And they had an AI. I think it was OCAST that was presenting the director.
Okay,
I was gonna ask, do some of those standards around IT talk about that?
No, not necessarily AI, but we as a firm are not super aggressive in getting through the AI technology, but it is getting into a lot of our products. So right now, like we have machine learning technology that can read a contract and spit out all of the kind of like key items to look at that we need to audit on. And if, as we run it through those systems, it will kick out, well, this is unusual for these types of contracts. You may want to go look at this a little bit farther. So we do have some AI built into our systems. The AICPA, it's a bigger project that they're working on because a lot of clients are getting very sophisticated AI technology pieces. And the question is, how do you audit that? Because it's not a person you can go talk to. It's an AI system. So it's slowly advancing, but it's going to take a little while to get there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else from council? Well, thank you all very much.
Okay, appreciate it.
Look forward to working with you. We'll visit again.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
They'll be back at the November meeting with what we call the Unbound ACFR. Basically, everything will be done except all the, putting it together. But the numbers should be finalized and their audit will be primarily completed at that point.
If we had any findings or anything, we would bring them up at that point before finalization. So, yep.
Flags are appreciated.
That's right. We'll be ready to sign it by then.
Item number 2, discussion regarding the FYE 2024 budget closeout. Mr. Francisco.
Yes, sir, I'm gonna pass around. And this is kind of in the fund summary format that you're accustomed to. What we're looking at here is what the auditors have received. Again, the city and my accounting staff prepares the financial statements when we close out the fiscal year. And at that point in time, we prepare in this fund summary format kind of where we actually were at the end of fiscal year 24 as opposed to where we thought we would be when we adopted the budget. So what you see in the first column to the left where it says fiscal year 24 estimated is what you saw when we adopted the budget, where we thought we would be as of June 30th when we adopted the budget. And then in the further to the right column, fiscal year 24 actual is where we actually ended up. I've kind of highlighted a few things where there are significant differences. First, you'll see that we spent about $3 million above our expected salary and benefit expenditures. Remember, that is a category. That's not just salaries, that's also overtime and part-time expenditures and healthcare benefits and pension contributions and all those sorts of things. So we overspent where we thought we were going to be there, but we significantly underspent where we thought we would be in supply and materials and service and maintenance. And those are the more controllable things where we're buying things, hopefully they come in less cost than what we thought they were going to be. We bought less than we thought we were going to be, or, as we'll talk about in a minute, we're delayed in actually paying for things that we're obligated to buy. So again, at the bottom line, on line 40 of the expenditure categories, we came in about $2 million below where we thought we were going to be in the general fund for fiscal year 24, and that's a good thing. On line 47, you see that we thought we would have about $1.4 million subsidy to the public safety sales tax fund, and we did not have one. We'll talk about why here in a minute. We thought we would have about a $3 million subsidy to the public transit fund, and we only had about an $800,000 subsidy to the public transit fund. We did not expect to have a subsidy to the YFAC fund, and we had about a $400,000 subsidy to the YFAC fund, and that's on line 50. All those things taken together, then you see that we spent about $8 million less than we thought we would. That's on line 57. So we thought we would lose on line 63 about $5 million, and we only lost about $101,000. We had about $100,000 of expenditures in excess of our revenues during fiscal year 24 in the general fund. So all those things taken together, our ending fund balance is about $5 million better off than we thought it would be. And here's where Anthony always gets called under the carpet by the union saying, you know, Anthony found $5 million. Okay, that's a fallacy. Okay, that is a fallacy. Look on line 67.
It's not in
Where you
that,
see,
not in that safe on in the floor in your office?
no, that's not it. When it was actually Tim Powers that moved into my old office in Building C, he said, I've been looking for that floor safe for a long time,
Yeah.
and I still haven't found it. I mean, where you at?
Anthony keeps all the hidden money.
On line 67, though, you see what is reserved for encumbrances. An encumbrance is where we have obligated to buy something. We know the price that we're going to pay for it. We know who we're going to buy it from, but they haven't delivered. We haven't been invoiced on it yet. And so we haven't actually paid out the money to whoever that vendor is. But the encumbrance is sitting out there. We know that we're going to have to spend this money when we get an invoice, and all those things taken together is about $5.3 million that we're going to have to spend in the next fiscal year or so.
So it's basically sitting on the liability side of the balance sheet.
Yes.
As soon as you receive the goods or services, it will then, there will then be,
It'll actually be an
Yeah.
expenditure, yeah.
it'll then flow through to the expenses.
Yeah. The largest of those is for those large capital equipment items where, you know, we have a $2 million fire truck, for example. And we know who we're buying it from, we know how much it costs, but they haven't delivered it yet, we haven't paid them yet. So we have a $2 million encumbrance sitting out there. At the time we adopted the budget, we expected to spend that money, but we haven't spent it yet. So that's why that shows up as an encumbrance. So you really kind of need to subtract out about, you know, $4.5–5 million of that fund balance because we're obligated to pay it out at some point in the future.
So this would be rollover items too that were ordered but not paid for yet? 'Cause
Yes.
don't we have a Bearcat that's supposed to be coming?
The Bearcat actually has come in.
Oh, okay, so we've already paid it?
I think so.
I
And
saw a
I'm,
picture of it, the
Yeah.
Citizens Academy, you got to see it, I think.
yeah, I'm pretty sure we paid for that.
Okay,
The biggest single item that I know of is that big fire truck.
okay, that's the extended ladder.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead.
the general fund, the surplus is 18 or 9?
It's 9. That's on line 69. Remember that of the $18 million fund balance on line 65, we have to subtract out that reserve for encumbrances, and we have to subtract out the reserve for operations, the 3% that by ordinance we have to have in fund balance. After those subtractions are made, though, we have about $9.7 million of excess fund balance that is at council's discretion when we appropriate that. Now, remember that we kind of are trying to keep our powder dry, trying to keep that money on hand for when we get an agreement with the Department of Mental Health to buy Griffin Park and Sutton Wilderness Land, and that's about $6 million that we've talked about for several months now, but that's just, that is the source of money that we have to pay that.
Does total reserves include rainy day fund?
Rainy day fund is in a separate fund. I did not print that one out, but that's about,
Okay, so we're, the FY 24 actual says 18 million-ish, but,
it's just the general fund, yes.
okay.
If we, with the library situation, if we had to cover the cost to get it reopened upfront, hoping to get reimbursed,
Let's try to see if Jason is here.
what would be the probable or appropriate account to Would it be the reserve? Would it be the rainy day
That
fund?
is an appropriate account. That's one place you might look to it. A more appropriate area would be the capital fund. And I did not print that one out either, but to the extent that you had some unreserved fund balance in the capital fund, that might be an area, or you might cancel or change around or delay some capital projects that are in the capital fund now to try to identify some money to pay for that.
Would the rainy day fund be, is it an emergency that could qualify under
It
that?
could, that's council's discretion. But one of the strings attached says that if we have an unexpected major expense, you have to have drawn down the general fund balance below 1%. But that is a source that you could tap on for that.
How much is it expected to cost at this point? I know it's costing
That's what I was
like,
seeing if Jason was here.
it's like several thousand a month to keep in stasis.
I don't,
As I understand
that's,
it,
you know, no, I've only been thinking about fixing it.
Yeah.
And every time Jason talks about what it's gonna cost to fix it, it goes up. I mean, you know,
I heard 10 million, but I don't know if that's accurate.
I had heard 7, and, you know, that, again, it keeps going up, but
Okay. I don't think we have that much in the rainy day fund, do we?
we don't.
Okay.
And that may be something that we consider next budget time. You said it was at 3% and changing it to 4 or 3.5% to just have a larger balance.
No, you have to have drawn down the general fund to 1%.
Initiate. Okay,
Before you can tap on the rainy day fund.
I was thinking of adding to it, making that larger.
Oh, yeah,
next time.
yes, you could do that. But remember, if you put it into the rainy day fund,
Hard to
then
get out,
you have, yeah, it's harder to get out.
like buying a CD. All right. That's good though. That's good news. That's not,
Yeah. Next fund I wanted to touch on just quickly is that public safety sales tax fund, and I just want to talk about why we didn't have to subsidize that fund. Where we had some savings is mainly in that capital equipment line item. We only spent about $2 million. We expected to spend about $5.2 million on capital equipment. But again, the biggest thing there is gonna be that big fire truck that we haven't paid for yet. That expenditure is not showing up yet. So again, the delay is a positive for the finances at the fiscal year ending date, but we got that big expenditure looming out there. And then in the transit fund,
And just, you're saying that did not end up needing to subsidy PSST because of that?
that's correct, yeah. In the general fund, it's on line 47. And in the public safety sales tax fund, you see where it says interfund transfer general fund. We expected to spend 1.4 million and actually didn't spend any general fund subsidy, general fund transfer to the public safety sales tax fund. You'll also see there that we expected to get about $700,000 from the school district for their share of the school resource officer program, and we only got about $500,000. And when that carries forward in the next year, we budgeted for about $780,000 next year, and we agreed to spend or only get about $400,000. So that's going to be a negative to the public safety sales tax fund in fiscal year 25.
How much do we subsidize the PSST?
In fiscal year 24, we did not. We didn't have to.
Like previously, would it be like
It
$1 million?
average, yeah, it's been an average of about $1 million, yeah.
Okay. And with this, the 4 SRs and the way they
No.
expect us to pay.
Before the additional SROs, yes.
What is,
We started to pay money to the additional 4 SROs during fiscal year 24.
so what do you think we might have to subsidize going forward with
We
this?
did some projections about that when we were talking about, you know, do we add 13 more and that sort of thing. And one of those scenarios that we presented was just of the 4. And it showed that, you know, starting with a subsidy of about $1 million, and that would inflate by about 5% per year.
And those 4 were, I know what we approved was around 900,000.
Yes.
That was the startup cost. It was 6
could be-
something?
upwards of 2 million from the general fund to PSST too, if
Yeah,
it
going,
doesn't.
going forward, we, I think that the subsidy would get around $2 million and continue to inflate.
By 5%.
Yeah, remember that, once we have, Fire Station Network 5 has been built, and that construction expense is completed, public safety sales tax, will roll into the general fund, 3/8% into the general fund, 1/8% to the capital fund. And where there's a excess of, expenditures for the additional programs in the public safety sales tax, the general fund will absorb that. You won't see a subsidy line, but it's just, it'll be an expense of the general fund and the capital fund. And I did not anticipate this back when that was written in 2014, but the biggest negative is gonna be on the capital side. 1/8% is about what we bring into the public transit fund. That's a 1/8% sales tax. So it's bringing in about $3 million a year. And again, back in 2014, we didn't anticipate a police car was gonna be costing $90,000. But we should be replacing about 10 police cars a year, just the additional police cars related to the public safety sales tax. We should be replacing about a fire truck a year. And that's way more than $3 million to do just those basic things, and that's going to inflate. So that's gonna be a larger problem going forward, this public safety sales tax.
We have talked about potentially redoing PSST. I almost wonder if there's a formula that would catch up with all the unknowns of the future, like
Yeah,
maybe write
no.
a formula for.
I did my best estimating back in 2014, and,
I would imagine that would be difficult to do.
yeah, it would be very
It'd be
difficult.
complicated.
We'll see, but again, back in 2014, I suggested that we should make it 5/8% instead of 1/2%, because we knew that those lines were gonna cross. The revenues were going to grow faster than, the expenditures are gonna grow faster than the revenues. We knew that. The answer that we came up with then, and that the voters approved, was just the general fund will absorb the difference. And we'll see what happens going forward. But where you might want to put back onto the ballot an increase the public safety sales tax rate, you might wanna inflate it a little bit, because we know that those expenses grow faster than the sales tax grows.
But we'd have to also update the date, because if it goes into the general fund, we'll have to renew the whole tax at 5/8 or whatever we decide.
If it rolls back into the general fund, like it's all obligated, does that kind of just end it after that?
No, it's just
I mean, you keep
accounted
the
for
fire-
differently. It's still, the 0.5% sales tax will still be there. And as long as we're spending more than that 0.5% is generating, we're meeting the letter of that law. And that won't be a problem.
So you could in future years just budget for the fire truck or the cars out of the general fund.
Or the capital fund, just as,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, I'll
Any thought about it being not rolled into the general, or it staying a separate fund?
You'd have to change the voter-approved ordinance to do that.
So voters would need to approve that
Yeah.
if we wanted to keep it a separate.
Could we add a municipal tax, something extra fine on municipal tickets to help offset some of?
Theoretically, but again, right now, fine and forfeiture revenue is a general fund revenue source. The amount of revenue that we generate from fines and forfeitures, and that going back to the general fund, is on line 8, about $1.2 million a year, is a drop in the bucket compared to what we would, you could double the fines, and it wouldn't be a drop in the bucket to what we would need in the,
also, wouldn't you run the risk of looking like you're
yeah.
fining people to pay for your equipment?
Yeah, again, the purpose of fines has never been to raise revenue. The purpose of fines is supposed to be to deter bad behavior and generate good behavior.
That number includes, that fines number, that's like every speeding ticket that's written in the city.
Every speeding ticket, every
All
parking ticket, every misdemeanor assault, all of that sort of thing.
And all of that goes to the police budget or
It goes
just
to the general
general
fund.
fund, but, okay, so tickets the police write, the revenue generated by the fines aren't necessarily going into the police department
Not directly,
budget now.
it's going to the general fund.
I just asked, so is the proper mechanism though to budget for these needs and with the budget for that department? And it comes from the general fund, just like other things, or
And not in my
capital
opinion, I shouldn't say no, not in my opinion, because again, municipal court collects the fine revenue.
No, I'm not talking fines. I'm talking about, just thinking if you need to replace 10 cars or a fire truck, isn't the usual standard, it's like every department looks at their budget, says these are our wants, and then you figure out which fund it's coming from.
Yeah, we have identified the source of vehicle replacement to be the capital fund, the capital outlay portion of the capital fund. And there's a competition, if you will, between all the departments for that money. So we know that we need to replace some backhoes in street maintenance, we need to replace some lawnmowers in parks. All of those things are coming out of the same pot of money. And that's where fleet maintenance gets involved and says, here's the list of vehicles that are more efficiently replaced than repaired.
So
And those
does
go up on the list.
PSST2 help with the equity of those requests between departments? If that's helping to pay for those cars, then we can get more backhoes or whatever it is
If
the
it were
fleet needs.
exactly right, yes, yeah.
Okay,
Now, remember that when I say 10 police cars a year, that's just the public safety sales tax ones that we added. That's not the general fleet of police cars, there's 100 and something of them. Okay, so we should be replacing about 40 police cars a year altogether. But I'm saying of that 1/8% dedicated public safety sales tax for fleet replacement, that's where you would look to replacing those public safety sales tax added cars.
okay. Thank you for
And the rest goes into the competition.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate the added clarification, because it definitely informs what we should probably talk about if we're gonna do something about another public safety sales tax.
Okay, I just highlighted these funds. Again, we have similar information for all of the funds of the city where we actually closed out the year, but I thought those were kind of the ones that I wanted to highlight. But if you have questions about any of the other funds, we'll be glad to put that together for you.
And so you were saying that the transit tax, or the transit fund, about $800,000 in subsidy from the general fund, and that's due to the on-demand program.
Mostly.
And there is a surplus in the transit fund, but it's just, no, it's
Yeah, there's an ending fund balance in the transit fund of about $2.2 million. But again, where we have, you see the line 8, those grant revenues that are flowing in there, that is for, we got a lot of grants, you'll recall, for fuel efficient vehicles. And we haven't bought those yet. So again, we kind of need to net out that revenue.
And it's $4 million that we're getting from the federal government with
That's for operations.
right. That's the federal transit grant.
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect.
I noticed advertising fees went up. Did we raise the fees, or they're just purchasing, more people are purchasing ads?
There's more people purchasing ads. You're looking at line 5.
Yes. And did we get, I think we put some new buses out there too that would have ad space.
Quite possibly. Yeah.
Okay.
That might be off on that. I don't remember what fiscal year that came in. But it may have been last year or the year before we paid for Or the federal government paid for 2 electric buses?
Yeah, I think 4 altogether. Yeah. Two.
Yeah. And that FTA grant, so I recall it being around $2.5 million before, but showing that we're getting 4. Is that just that the federal government has increased it that much?
No, a lot of that is one-time revenue for those vehicle replacements and those sorts
The
of things.
FTA grant, that's what that, okay.
For line 7, is that just, you get it once a year or
Scott,
crack
I'm
at
gonna
it
ask if you might know what ODOT PTRF would stand for. It's a grant.
Public Transit Something Fund.
Revolving fund, I believe.
Do you only get to apply that like once or once a year?
You let me check in on that one. I'm not certain exactly what that item is, and I'd hate to misquote on that. I can get that information. I'll see if I can, I'll make a text real quick, see if I can.
Well, that's actually good news. All of this is good news. We're not getting rich, but we're staying fed. I think that's a wonderful conversation for us to get into, is to looking, when we looked at fees and things like that earlier this year, I've forgotten exactly what month that was. We didn't come to any resolution, but it may be that we need to sit down and put that as an agenda item for us to look at how public safety sales tax, what we want to do with that, since it's sundowning and doing the other things, what do we do?
It's not sundowning, but I know that you have the consultant that's looking at public safety needs and that, but no, the public safety sales tax too is permanent.
It is, but the way that the payment, I know it all goes in the same pot, but it just seems like it's easier if it just paid from one fund. And when, in my simple mind, to be able to sit down and say, we've got this amount of money to spend. Do we need to raise that amount? And if we need to raise that amount, by how much and which direction do we put the money? Does it still go to general fund or does it stay as a separate fund? And so it's a conversation. I don't know that I have an opinion on it, other than it seems to want to go up, and I hate the idea of raising taxes.
Yeah.
I think it would help too when we finally get to see the public safety study that was done. Maybe October is what I heard
Oh, did you?
on presentation.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard like every month for the last few months, but
It's coming. It's coming. So's Christmas.
yeah.
Anything else that you'd like to add, or anything else from council on this? It's wonderful information. Thank you, sir. And your staff.
And I just have one quick question, follow up from retreat. When do we start talking about the permits and potentially raising some here and there?
Yeah, and when you talked about where we looked at the fees, these meetings, that was in September.
Okay.
And we asked council, we gave you the background on what the fees were and asked you to say, okay, what ones of these do you want to look at? And Councilman Grant did give us a few that we have been looking at. Good. One of which is permits, one of which was the scooter fees, dispensary fees. There was about 3 or 4 of them, and we have been looking at those. And
We ought to enter that into conversation and then put it down as a topic to
With
look at
another finance
as
committee?
another
Yeah,
finance
we'll bring
committee
it to
meeting. And put it down there so we can agendize it, work it through, see if we have recommendations and go with what we got. All right, item 3, discussion regarding the FY 2026 budget calendar.
In your packet is the proposed budget calendar, and that's not a typo, it's fiscal year 26 that we're talking about here. In your electronic, your laptops, you have an update to what was in your packet. And so I want to make sure that everybody's looking at the same thing, so we did make a few copies of the update. The only real change from what was in your packet to what we have now is your council retreat related to the capital budget is now proposed to be on March the 4th. So all the other dates that, for council's action is highlighted there, bolded out. It starts again kind of with what we're doing right now. And then November the 19th, you have your first work session on the capital budget to let our departments know what priorities you have for the capital budget in the coming fiscal year.
So what do you want ready from us to go for that meeting?
Right now, oh, no, we will prepare, right now, we just want to know if you're okay with the calendar, are these dates okay? Assuming that, then we will come back in November with the departments that have capital programs and that sort of thing with, here's where we are, here's what we think we need to be doing, here's where we underspent or overspent on the capital budget last year or two. That library thing is gonna be a big point of discussion at that meeting. But again, that's when we'll talk about those capital things.
Okay, and we're realizing, or answering too, that this can be a little bit fluid. It can move weeks or however it needs to.
Yes, sir.
Does anybody have any problems with the budget calendar?
I don't see any particular
Okay.
conflicts.
Well, that's wonderful. Let's go with that and see how it flows. It's always a lot of work. That big book, or those big books, there's a lot of work that goes into them. Amazes me. Item number 4, discussion regarding monthly revenue and expenditure reports. Our favorite.
I'll turn it over to Councilmember Holman. Again, I didn't want to highlight a whole lot of things other than the very last page that you see there, where we're comparing normal sales tax growth to comparable cities in the state. And as of our September remittance, you see that we're kind of at the low end of average with our 1.45% decline from last fiscal year. I don't know if we should take any comfort in that. We budgeted for a 2% increase, but that is the trend that we're on, and hopefully it'll improve.
And with that, you're telling us, yes.
I'm telling us we're better off than Oklahoma City.
Better than Edmond right now.
Now, the comparison, this time last year to September 22, we're way better off this year because last time it was 6% down.
Yes.
So this year it's only a quarter down. Quarter of a percent, that is.
I did notice too, that the sales tax change from prior year, fiscal ending 2025, each month so far shows in the red or negative. But one of the things I would note about that for anybody watching is that, so July, it says it's down 2.72%. But when you look at the next graph, the Norman unrestricted sales tax, 2019 to 2025, you'll see that this July was the second highest collection we'd had in the last 6 years. So it's kind of makes you think on this one that we're losing, but we're actually quite considerably high over that pre-2020 threshold, I guess, and continuing to maintain it. Now, it's not as high as the last 2 years, but so it can be a little bit, I guess, misleading to anybody that's not familiar with these graphs if they think, oh, well, it's 3 negative bars, but it's actually, well, negative compared to historic high and still higher than what we experienced before now, so doing good, looks like. But yeah, it's hard, can't sustain that historic high that we saw the last 2 years, I think, for everyone. But
Is there a metric that we could use when we compare that to inflation? What is actually our buying power? As you said, a car is now costing us $100,000 that several years ago was $30,000,
Right.
45. Is there a way of indexing that?
We can certainly apply a deflator to it. You know, the rate of inflation is this. But I don't know how realistic that is about, you know, the cost is the cost. I mean, you know, it's just where we are.
I was- I thought I heard that the feds might be doing a cut.
They did.
Half
Oh,
of,
they've already done it?
Because of
Yeah, no.
interest rate.
just
Yes,
half a
the Fed
point,
did-
Anthony.
The Fed, no, that's a big,
I know.
that's a,
I heard a candidate for national office say it. It's just half, that's not even anything.
Oh,
It's like,
no, that's
actually,
a
that's a
big,
lot.
as far as the Federal Reserve move is concerned, that's huge. And it's the biggest, it's the first decline since 2020. So that's big news. But remember that Federal Reserve actions are only at the short end of what is called the yield curve. And what happens at the 10-year or the 20-year rate is more important, is my opinion, as it relates to the overall economy. That's what people are looking at when they're looking at a mortgage or looking at a car loan and that sort of thing. The overnight rates, the Fed funds rate, are really important to my short-term investments. So I'm going to have to take some really hard looks. And you've seen, when you see my monthly investment reports, we have a whole bunch of money in an overnight money market fund. Very unusual in my whole 40-year career of doing investments to have that much money overnight. But, okay, I mean, that thing's been paying 5%. So why should I go out 3 or 4 years when I can get 5% overnight? Okay, but that's going to change when, you know, that is going to impact, the Federal Reserve move is going to impact on that. So I'll be extending some of those investments out going forward.
I was looking at money last night or the night before and looking at the difference between 15 years, ARM mortgages and all the rest of that other kind of stuff. And that 15-year mortgage, which to me would be horrible to pay on it and on anything, is so much cheaper than it may pay out. And that's goofy. That's your invert.
It's unusual. It's extremely unusual for there to be an inverted yield curve, and it is unprecedented for there to be an inverted yield curve for this long. It's been 2 years. I mean, it's been.
It is, yeah. And the historic inflation rate has been around 2.4%.
2.5.
They I think that starts in 1947 or some kind of number like that. And so there have been so many peaks and valleys, but that's the thing. I think it was up to 7 during this last year.
Yeah, at least about 6.5, about a year or so ago.
That's a bunch of money.
Highly unusual.
But I remember 14 and no way. Borrowing money was no deal.
Is there
Inflation rates of the 80s.
any perspective you have about that inflation? Because now that at first everybody assumed, well, there's supply disruption, there's this and that, COVID. And then more and more as we've gotten further away from 2020, more discussion about it not really being so much inflation anymore and companies
It's
artificially.
real inflation, but what pushes inflation is wages. And you know, when you're talking about the minimum wages and all of that, just understand that is very inflationary. And you'll recall, I think this was the budget process of we're going into fiscal year 23. And I had a really nice, I thought at least I was proud, graph that showed, you know, what was going on with this inflation. And we talked about COVID, and we talked about coming out of COVID. And I gave my cute little example of my Wendy's Frosty and how I had gone to, you know, after a stressful council meeting, had gone to get my Wendy's Frosty, and Wendy's had their sign closed because they had no employees. Coming out of COVID, recall that in order to get employees to come back to work, they had to increase wages. Increasing wages pushes inflation. Okay, so it just goes like this literally. And that's what has happened over the last 2 or 3 years. Is, you know, there's the invisible hand that you see is a very real thing. You know, the market is all of these things acting together, and there's very little that any individual can do about it. It's a whole bunch of actions impacting on each other that drives things up or down, and then the mass hysteria of crowds kicks in, and then you have a stock market boom or bust all of a sudden, and then the cycle starts all over. I'm not a great economist, but I'm a great observer of the economy. And just watching what has gone on over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years has been fascinating for observers like myself.
There's definitely a lot of speculation though about some companies raising prices, keeping them high under the guise of inflation. And, you know, their record profit, stock buybacks, all that stuff, while these prices,
I'd also
while these
say
prices stay high.
there's price fixing going on, so I forget the name of this third party. It's a lawsuit with
Redfin?
Atlanta.
Or, not Redfin,
It's
but
like Page something.
yes, yeah.
But there's a lawsuit right now against it because landlords who would ordinarily be in competition with each other aren't necessarily sharing the data about like their amenities and price per square foot and rooms and all that, but they're using this third party to kind of basically suggest what the prices should be in an area, and so then you're seeing rents go way up, which then it's like, what is a living wage when it's a price fix?
And again, everybody else observing what's going on. This guy over here raised his rent, so now I can raise mine. And the cycle continues. When I carry my Wendy's Frosty analogy further, remember that in order to get the employees to come back, they had to raise their wages, which means that Wendy's, in order to cover their costs of those increased wages, raises the price of a burger. And the cycle, the cycle continues. That's how it happens. And it's not a single big action. It's a whole bunch of little actions impacting on each other.
Now they're all lowering their price to try to get us back.
Yeah.
$5 meal deal at McDonald's right now.
Oh,
If
also
the money doesn't spend,
A
it's
dollar or
not.
anything.
Yeah,
there's another lawsuit against a price fixing thing with food
it's a
too.
grocery chain, yeah.
Yeah,
I saw that.
so anyways, definitely a lot of factors going into it.
And I think a lot of people are recognizing that. I spoke with a lady who wants to bring a business here, and I said, well, about what we're expecting is that you'll pay over $18.75 an hour, because that's about the minimum. That's actually at the bottom. She said, oh, that's not a problem. We pay 20. And because that's what market makes her pay to get somebody out there. And the discussion went from there. And so I'm a market guy. I guess Clint was in here. He convinced me over the years that that's the way to be. And so it's hard to make a prediction and have it come true, but obviously you're pretty accurate. And that's the good thing. Our guess is good. Yes. Did we make any mistakes in past year's budget that's gonna grab us around the ankles or something? No. So that gives, at least it gives me faith in when we start the budget year again, are the assumptions gonna be reliable? The answer is yes, because there's a long history. 27 years, a long history of doing that. So,
And again, where all those things come out in the wash, where we're wrong, we want to make sure that we're wrong to inflate the fund balance. We want to make sure that all those things taken together and all those things acting together, I want to make sure that Anthony, his guess caused the fund balance to be higher, not lower. And that's our ultimate goal.
You always did well with the Hotel Motel Fund when I was treasurer of the Arts Council.
Thank you.
We always looked at when you would come back, oh, you guys have more money.
Finding $5 million sounds better than we are negative $5 million.
oh yeah.
Room tax fund, by the way, is something I'm gonna be looking at really closely the next couple of
I
months.
did have somebody ask about that.
Because the SEC thing, you'll recall, I really don't think it's gonna have a whole lot of impact on the general fund or on sales tax. All of those things kind of, Daryl does, I really don't. But I do think it's gonna have an impact on the room tax, and we did budget for that, for the room tax. And where that will play itself out is in what happens in the month of September and October in the hotel industry. And this coming weekend's a big part of that. I mean, this is a huge game. And I've been really looking at the weather, and it's a night game, which we love a night game. I mean,
We tried to get a rental car and there was no rental cars in the metro, so that's an indicator of.
that's the sort of thing that you look at.
I do see like enforcement being an issue for short-term rentals. I know it's a problem now. I think there were like 60 of them that are supposed to be paying into that.
Yeah, we do a really good job. Jeannie in the legal department and Mindy on my staff really keeps a pretty good track on all of those short-term rentals are supposed to be permitted. And when they get their permit, they have to register with a service that's collecting the room tax when they have a client. Do we have some folks who are operating without a permit? Probably. But if you say that there's 60, I bet we have 50 of them that are permitted. I mean, you know, they do a pretty good job. And one of the things that they do is to look for, you know, Verbo, who's in Norman, Oklahoma in Verbo. They can, you know, they're advertising on Verbo or on Airbnb, we can see them. Do they have a permit? Yeah, and so I think we do a pretty good job on that.
Getting compliance.
And where we don't, Dan Shim is gonna tell us.
I did have someone, okay,
Oh, I was gonna say, we did talk about adding RVs to the language of that guest room.
But that'll take a vote of the people because of the way we wrote it. So it's just bringing it back. I don't think that'd be a contentious issue. It's just one more thing we need to put on a ballot.
I did have somebody ask me this week about what is the guest tax generating since we increased it? What has the change been? We talked about that before, but now that's been a year and a half almost. Maybe an update.
Yeah, we can certainly bring that to the next meeting.
It's in your packet, in your revenue report. There's
Oh,
a section on room tax in there. And it compares to this time last year as well.
Where is that?
It's on page 4. It's on page, it's
Yeah, page 4.
item 4, page 2 of the revenue report. At the top.
Page 2, okay, here we go.
We've collected $575 to date compared to $452 in the prior year.
But last year, we already had the increase. The increase had already gone into effect this time last year. Could we maybe get unless I'm missing it here, maybe a comparison to 2 years ago before we increased? How much more revenue is it bringing in since it increased?
Yeah, we can certainly do that.
Getting that, yeah.
Anything else from council? Any other questions?
You got the answer?
I got a response on the answer. It is the Public Transit Revolving Fund. And it is any agency that applies for it gets awarded that funding to just kind of help their transit authority. And last year, our total was about $206,000 by the time we got done. So it's just an annual amount of money that we can apply for through ODOT.
And is it for operations or is it for capital?
I believe it's more for the operations side of it.
So if we talked about ticket prices and things like that, ride prices and such, that takes the place of charging for the ride. Is that correct?
No, so this is based upon the number of miles the transit system travels every year. So it's more an operational just for payback into the system. So I don't think that fare would affect this.
Do you know what if it's like weighted, like if you do obviously miles, but ridership, like is there anything that kind of?
According to the information that was sent over, it is based solely on the number of miles that are driven by the transit system that year.
Okay. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. All right. Well, since there is no more, we'll go to our favorite subject and we are adjourned.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
We're driving more miles now than we were last year.
Yeah. But I don't know that we have more riders. That'd be, that's another.
That's next week.